Hello, and welcome to another week. Remember, the work week is a fiction. Monday, doubly so. You can get rid of them if you really want to. This is Social Justice Alchemy. So, next up on the podcast docket is AIDS/HIV denialism, or, slightly more popular, HIV/AIDS denialism, or HAD, which means we get to call the denialists Hadders. Fun with acronyms. Alright, so HAD can take a number of forms, like denying that AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, even exists, that HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, exists, that HIV causes AIDS, that HIV tests are reliable, or that the antiretroviral medicines that help AIDS patients don't. Yeah. Really, this shit is all over the place. First off, AIDS doesn't exist? What the fuck? Okay, for this bunch of wackadoodle, the claim is that AIDS isn't a disease or syndrome, but a catch-all for a bunch of different, similar-looking conditions. The denialists say that what we call AIDS is just the result of malnutrition and recreational drug use taking its toll on the body, or even that it's caused by the medicines that you use to treat AIDS. Now, how would the antiretroviral drugs used to treat AIDS cause AIDS before the patient was taking the medicine? Don't ask. We're in denial territory, where reality isn't real, but money aplenty it to be made. So, yeah, AIDS does exist. It was first documented, at least in the US, in the early 1980s, when outbreaks of certain very rare conditions started cropping up. These were diseases that were only associated with severely compromised immune systems, and these patients were adults without a history of immune disorders. The CDC organized a task force to investigate these outbreaks. At first, the illness was referred to by several different names related, for example, to various rare illnesses that occurred in victims or the common characteristics of the victims. The press, of course, came up with an incredibly helpful method for referring to the disease that made things better for everyone and didn't cause any problems at all. GRID, the gay-related immune deficiency. And there we have one of the big reasons why HAD has been so popular for so long. People have come a long way in the last 30 years. In 1981, when they were still calling it GRID, gay folks were fighting for their lives. Gay marriage wasn't even a distant dream. You could lose your job for being gay, your landlord could evict you, your family could, and probably would, disown you, you'd face hostility and discrimination in public, you'd very likely face violence in public, and when you did, not if, when you did, you wouldn't dare call the police because they might well decide to go ahead and finish the job of beating the gay out of you. So, AIDS was associated strongly with the gay community from the very first, and the public, for a long time, assumed that having AIDS meant you were gay, and being gay meant you would get AIDS. And of course, the fundagelicals jumped all over it, claiming AIDS was God's punishment on the homosexuals. To their credit, the CDC quickly realized that AIDS is not intrinsically related to being gay, and had coined the term AIDS by the summer of 1982, a year after the syndrome was discovered. The revelation that the epidemic wasn't confined to the gay community didn't calm people's fears, obviously. It helped turn things into a different kind of panic, and birthed a lot of conspiracy theories, fear, and hatred directed at the gay community. As recently as 2013, televangelist and human skin factory Pat Robertson was claiming that gay people were using sharpened rings to cut people during handshakes so as to spread AIDS. Now, in 1982, that sort of thinking was everywhere, especially since the disease was spreading without apparent cause and popping up in major cities without showing up in the intervening locations. Perhaps you've heard of Patient Zero? That actually comes from epidemiological tracking, as they tried to understand the disease, how it spread and developed, and how they could treat it. They asked for, and got, a surprising amount of information from infected gay men about their previous sexual partners. The coding for this information would identify partners by where they were from, and a person from out of town would be marked with an O, not a 0. And there was one particular out-of-towner. He was a flight attendant for an airline with a knack. The man had a knack for picking up men in cities he flew in and out of. And that's one of the ways the disease spread so quickly and why it showed up in major airport hubs first. The Reagan White House didn't help any of what was going on, not with treating the disease, nor quelling the public's fears about this unknown plague, nor with the hatred being aimed at gay people. The White House press secretary spent a lot of time cracking jokes with the press corps at the gay community's expense. It's all rather horrific. Anyway, today we know that AIDS is caused by HIV, and that HIV is a mutated form of a related virus, SIV, the simian immunodeficiency virus, that affects apes. Now, I'll ask you to imagine how much fun it was for the black community when it was discovered that a sexually transmitted disease had its origin in African chimpanzees. As someone who was alive and marginally aware when that little tidbit was discovered, yeah, people were incredibly racist about it. Just so you know, it comes from the habit of some poverty-stricken people of killing and eating chimpanzees, aka bushmeat. At any rate, the disease spread out of Africa thanks to the Congo achieving independence in 1960. When Belgium left, they didn't leave any experienced administrators behind, and the international community reached out for help. A large number of Haitians answered the call, and it appears some caught the disease at that time, taking it back to Haiti with them. This explains one of the CDC's early attempted names for AIDS, the 4-H disease, for heroin users, homosexuals, hemophiliacs, and Haitians, the 4 most common victims of the disease. We now know that the disease is transmitted by the exchange of bodily fluids, such as during sex, or blood transfusion, or intravenous drug use. The significant number of Haitians who helped the Congo transition to independence brought the illness back to Haiti with them in the mid-60s, and it appears then to have transferred to the mainland U.S. in the late 60s or early 70s, where it established a foothold. It, of course, takes time for the disease to progress to the point where the immune system has become so weak that other opportunistic diseases can infect the patients. Hence why AIDS didn't start appearing until 1981. So, now we've got a lot of homophobia and a healthy current of racism. Can we get any other bigotries in there? Well, of course we can. Anti-Semitism. Plenty of conspiracy theories running around out there about the origins of AIDS being a Jewish plot to something white people, something black people, something gay people. But despite the various conspiracy theories, and despite the wide variety of nonsense the denialists throw out there, the overwhelming majority of HAD came from homophobia, at least for a long time. HAD appears to have declined somewhat, becoming a weird, culty thing powered not only by homophobia and a soupçon of racism, but also with a healthy fear of any large group of experts like doctors and pharmacists and other, well, let's be honest, that's where the anti-Semitism comes into play. Conspiracy theories love to hate on the Jews. But there's a weird little strain of had you might not see coming. It's chiropractors. Now, I'll be ranting in detail about chiropractors once we get to the C's, but let's leave it for now that the core of chiropractic is the belief that all illness, is caused by so-called subluxations, or malformations of the spinal column. These subluxations prevent God's energy from up in heaven being transmitted to your organs via the spinal column. See, heaven's above us, right? And the energy comes in through your head and gets to your body via the spine because logic. To be fair, some chiropractors mix the core chiropractic bullshit with other forms of complete bullshit, and some even try to practice something approaching medicine. However, the fact remains that chiropractic is built on a foundation of manure, and that includes the belief that the germ theory of disease is wrong, and that all doctors are either ignorant quacks or paid shills. Your life has to be pretty goddamn sad if you're on the same side as neo-Nazis, the KKK, and Pat Robertson, and you look like the weird one because, no, it's not about the Jews, it's just that your spine is kind of bendy, so God's magic energy is having trouble getting to your pancreas. And here's where I want to go ahead and throw a lot of shade at religion. One highly effective method for preventing the spread of HIV is wearing condoms. And a large number of very well-funded and politically active churches are against condoms because baby Jesus is allergic to latex or some shit. The Catholic Church naturally bears a huge chunk of blame because they've always been against any kind of birth control or family planning, making them just a little bit genocidal because people are dying by the millions from this shit in countries where the Catholic Church has massive influence. However, the proddies aren't getting off scot-free here. Being in favor of birth control and abortion used to be a Protestant way of distinguishing themselves from the hated Catholics, but that changed with the birth of the so-called moral majority. In response to blacks and gays and Jews suddenly becoming people, the fundagelicals decided to freak the fuck out and launch a moral crusade. They wanted to get the Catholics on their side, so they adopted birth control and abortion as pet issues. And little did they know that those would rapidly consume most of their energy and wouldn't get the Catholics on their side. Still, they are highly energized and well-funded, and they like to evangelize and try to get laws passed. We've been seeing the fruits of their efforts here in the U.S., of course, but they also do this shit overseas. Uganda, for example, has passed a number of evangelical-backed anti-gay laws. The fundagelicals are pushing as hard as the Catholics to make birth control and abortion illegal wherever they can, and their disproportionate influence in the U.S. government increases that power because they wield the twin cudgels of foreign aid and military intervention to push foreign governments in the direction they want. Have I mentioned lately how much I hate religion? Because I really hate religion. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, the HIV infection rate stands at roughly 8.8% of the population. And that rate is increasing. Tens of millions of people are dying of an illness that does not need to spread. That's not strictly a consequence of HIV/AIDS denialism, but the Hatters have good friends in the church and the Thuglican Party. Hell, some of them are prominent members of both, and the fact that HAD is wrapped up in homophobia and racism just lets it get more deeply embedded, sort of running under the surface. So keep an eye out for HAD-ism, HAD-ers, HAD, generally speaking. Watch out for HIV/AIDS denialism, and the fact that it is killing millions of people worldwide.
Harry Truman, Doris Day, Red China, Johnny Ray, South Pacific, Punch Winchell, Joe DiMaggio, John McCarthy, Richard Nixon, Studebaker, Television, North Korea, South Korea, Marilyn Monroe, Rosenberg's H-Bomb, Sugar Ray, Panmoon, John Brando, the King and I, and the Catcher in the Rye, Eisenhower vaccine, England's got a new queen, Marciano, Liberace, said Diana goodbye. We didn't start the fire, it was always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, no we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. Joseph Stalin, Alan Cobb, Nasser and Prokofiev, Rockefeller, Campanella, Communist Bloc, Roy Cohn, Pomperon, Toscanini, Jack Ron, Din Bin, Two Falls, rock around the clock. Einstein, James Dean, Brooklyn's got a winning team. David Crockett, Peter Pan, Elvis Presley, Disneyland, Bardo, Budapest, Alabama, Khrushchev, Princess Grace, Peyton Place, trouble in the Suez. We didn't start the fire, it was always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, no, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. Little Rock, Pasternak, Mickey Mantle, Kerouac, Sputnik, Joe and Lie Bridge on the River Clyde, Lebanon, Charles de Gaulle, California baseball, start with a homicide, children of the Little Mile. Buddy Holly and her Space Monkey Mafia, hula hoops, Castro, Edsel is a no-go. U2, Scenery, Paola and Kennedy, Jumpy Checker, Psycho, Belgians in the Congo. We didn't start the fire, no, it's always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, no, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. Hemingway, Eichmann, Stranger in a Strange Land, Dylan, Berlin, Bay of Pigs Invasion, Lawrence of Arabia, British Beatlemania, Old Miss, John Glenn, Liston Deeds, Patterson, football, Malcolm X, British politician, sex, JFK, blown away. What else do I have to say? We didn't start the fire, it was always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, no, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. Birth control, Ho Chi Minh, Richard Nixon back again, Moonshot, Woodstock, Watergate, punk rock, Reagan, Palestine, terror on the airline, Ayatollahs in Iran, Russians in Afghanistan, Wheel of Fortune, Sally Ride, heavy metal, suicide, foreign debts, homeless vets, AIDS, crack, burning gets, epidemics on the shore, China's under martial law, rock and roller, cola wars, I can't take it anymore. We didn't start the fire, but when we are gone, will it still burn on and on and on and on and on? No, we didn't start the fire, no, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. Marilyn Monroe. Okay. Let's try that without the horrible mistakes, huh?
The Three Pillars. The three pillars of white supremacy, as outlined by Andrea Smith, are slavery and capitalism, the interaction of white supremacy with Africa, genocide/colonialism, white supremacy in the Americas, and Orientalism/war, white supremacy in Asia. Before we continue, the controversy. Andrea Smith is, as best I can tell, fairly well respected as an activist for women generally and women of color in particular, as well as an academic working on related topics. Unfortunately, she has maintained that she is Cherokee since at least 1991, and said that her identification as such was part of the reason why she was denied tenure at the University of Michigan in 2008. However, she has no connection with any tribe, and a tribal genealogist has said that she hired him twice, and he found no evidence of Cherokee ancestry either time. Many Cherokee scholars and activists have criticized her or even condemned her for this, saying her actions hurt Cherokee people and Native Americans more broadly. Her response has been to continue to claim Cherokee ancestry and identity, rejecting the need to be officially affiliated with the tribe. So, yeah, on that front, Andrea Smith is a douche. And on a side note, this offers the chance to reflect on Elizabeth Warren's related claims and position. As I understand it, Elizabeth Warren once identified as a Native American on a form in law school, thanks to a long-standing family belief that one of her ancestors was Cherokee. That appears to be the only way in which her story is similar to Smith's, because she never otherwise claimed Cherokee heritage, never identified as Cherokee, and never used it to advance her career. Instead, Harvard claimed it on her behalf to defend itself against accusations that it didn't hire professors of color. When she went on to enter politics, Warren continued to not claim Cherokee ancestry, heritage, or identity. She didn't run on it, didn't include it in campaign materials or ads. It wasn't until Trump started talking politics that, once again, other people dug it up to use for their own purposes, against her. She has continued to maintain, and a DNA test appears to support her, that she has Native ancestry, but she has never claimed tribal affiliation or identity. Anyway, Smith's Three Pillars. Smith edited an anthology published in 2006, The Color of Violence, the Incite Anthology. One of the articles was her own work, Heteropatriarchy and the Three Pillars of White Supremacy, Rethinking Women of Color Organizing. It's a 6-page article that implicitly and explicitly criticizes the oppression Olympics thinking that crops up in activism and organizing. The article doesn't mention intersectionality, but looking over it, it seems to respond and criticize it. I also see a lot of bell hooks in the article, though I confess I've never read hooks. In short, what I see here is like that surprisingly old criticism. There is much here that is good and original. What is original isn't good, and what's good isn't original. That criticism dates back to at least 1781. So let's look at what Smith says here. Remember, it's only a 6-page article with a link in the thingy, so you can easily go read it for yourself. After her introduction criticizing oppression Olympics for stymieing organizing, Smith says that white supremacy rests on 3 pillars, 3 logics, 3 methods of interacting with non-white populations: slavery/capitalism, genocide/colonialism, orientalism/war. She then follows that with a discussion of the implications for organizing, talks about heteropatriarchy in U.S. empire, and her conclusions. To start, I don't disagree with her 3 categories, or that they're interconnected. When Europeans exploded onto the rest of the world, they encountered different regions with different human populations, different cultures, technologies, and European actions against those populations differed accordingly. However, and this critique may be unfair, their actions weren't so easily disentangled as she seems to posit. This critique may be unfair because it's a very brief article by Smith, not a full academic treatment. Capitalism can't be easily linked only to slavery, or even primarily to slavery. Genocide wasn't limited to the Americas, Orientalism didn't just manifest in a war, and she seems to ignore Australia entirely. White supremacy and, yes, heteropatriarchy manifested themselves differently on the different continents, not because they embodied different logics, but because the same logic, us are good, you are bad, was responding to different situations. White supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal imperialism, Weishi, operated via near absolute genocide in the Americas and not in Asia nor in Africa, not because Europeans didn't want to enslave and profit from Native American bodies, but because European diseases repeatedly decimated native populations, beginning and enabling that genocide. By contrast, African and Asian populations had resistances to those diseases, and Europeans simply couldn't commit those genocides. Likewise, Weishi manifested differently in Asia than it did in Africa. Africa presented an entirely different landscape of diseases and crops that Europeans had difficulty penetrating. Asia had cultures, traditions, and civilizations that Europeans recognized and respected. In Africa, Europeans kidnapped individuals into slavery because they had so much difficulty controlling the landscape and surviving the climate. In Asia, they dominated politically through warfare because the path of Asian civilization had led to hierarchies that could be exploited in that fashion, which path African civilizations hadn't taken. In all 3 cases, European imperialists transformed the native population into an exotic other to be dominated, exploited, and killed as necessary. They were to be brought into the existing hierarchy as less than Europeans, which led to the invention of both whiteness and the other races/racisms that Weishi exploited. Capitalism encouraged this through profit motive, racism through emotional means. Genocide, war, and slavery were all tools through which the logic of Weishi operated. European invaders didn't develop a different perspective on Native Americans completely independent from their attitudes toward Asians. Instead, they had a single viewpoint, that they and their civilization were the peak of all humanity, and that others were lesser beings to be used. Africans and Native Americans thus became unintelligent savages who were incapable of civilization. Africans were distinguished from Native Americans as violent brutes to justify holding them violently in bondage, as a way to control them. By contrast, Native Americans were denigrated as being unforgivably weak so as to justify not holding them in bondage, and instead merely driving them to extinction and taking their land. Asian civilization couldn't be ignored, so it had to be worked around, and the result was that Weishi developed Orientalism, a confusing morass of conflicting beliefs, at once praising Asian people for the unignorable facts of their long history, their historical developments, their art, culture, and science, their basic humanity, while at the same time rendering them inferior, barbarian, effeminate, weak, and deserving of European domination. Meanwhile, Australian natives were treated in their own way, another combination of the attacks on other peoples. They were enslaved and subjected to genocide. They were kidnapped, owned, murdered, raped, re-educated, and had their land stolen. Their experience was different from all the others, but built on the same foundation. Perhaps the fact that their situation contains elements of both African and American colonization, preventing them from fitting neatly into the three pillars, is why Smith excluded them from her analysis. Or, perhaps, like many people, she just forgot about them. In any event, no, it's not different logics, different pillars. It's one logic, the fascist logic of hierarchy, of believing that some people are possessed of some essence that renders them superior, and others an essence that makes them inferior. And this applies not only to individuals, but to whole populations and races. So long as they were confined to Europe, European fascist hierarchism confined itself to identify different European populations as superior or inferior, different European individuals. When, through historical accident, Europeans burst out and began attacking the rest of the world, that same fascist hierarchical thinking was applied repeatedly and in different directions to the rest of the world. And I want to stress that that fascist hierarchical thinking is not and has never been confined to Europe. That form of thinking has always been part of humanity. Wherever humans had the good luck to discover writing, and wherever we had the good luck for that writing to survive to the present, we discover the same variations in human thought. All humans and all human populations have fascist tendencies, with some feeling more strongly than others the emotions that drive toward fascism. Had historical and geographical accident driven things differently, a Chinese global empire would have exercised the same logic in different directions. Intersectional thinking would instead be operating to undermine Han supremacist capitalist heteropatriarchal imperialism. Perhaps the Queen of Sheba would have implemented a heteromatriarchy. Like I said, I'm seeing a lot in this article that owes a great deal to intersectional thinking and perhaps bell hooks. I'm not excessively impressed by Smith's analysis, and I have to roll my eyes at her apparently complete lack of self-awareness in writing about white people appropriating native identity during the section on genocide and native erasure. She appears to build on Marxist critiques, on intersectional critique, on the work of actual women of color, but it doesn't look like she's adding anything new. On the other hand, maybe my perspective is too limited, too distant, too ill-informed. I could easily be biased in that I'm an outsider who really knows only about the best, the strongest, the most useful portions of critical race theory, of intersectionality, that are filtering out to the broader population. Smith's article is more than a decade old, and I have the advantage of not being down in the weeds with the real intellectuals. I could easily be treating Smith unfairly here. So anywho, links down in the thingy. Let me know what you think about Smith and about my reading of her work. I'm also going to link to a couple of other blogs in order to sort of help you build a broader perspective and if you don't know too much about the things I'm talking about. Now, how about a little bit of news? A little good news, a little bad news, yeah? We had an election, you may have noticed. And Trump fired his attorney general. Those two are pretty goddamn related, I think. I mean, he fired his attorney general the day after the election. What a fucking wang. Alright. The bad news is that Trump is triggering yet another constitutional crisis. And he did it in the immediate aftermath of the election because he knew that he would be facing consequences, finally, for all of his criminal behavior. Because the good news is Democrats won the House. Okay. Before you get too upset with me, no, I don't think Democrats are great. I just think they're a hell of a lot better than the Republicans. Because, yeah, they're liberal, they're capitalist, they support the system that is bad, generally, for people. but they're not fascists. Okay, so yes, the Democrats winning the House is good news. They didn't win the Senate, but nobody was really expecting that. So, a little bit of good news, a little bit of bad news. The good news is we got the result we were expecting. Democrats won by millions of votes, which means they just barely picked up a majority in the House. Some places moved again toward legalizing pot or ending gerrymandering. I think Michigan did well on both of those. This was a massive wave for women. We have I think we have more than 100 women in the House, which means that 25% of the House is now women. Still nowhere near enough. We had a whole lot of firsts. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who identifies as a Democratic Socialist, is the youngest woman ever elected to the House. We have our first Muslim woman in the House. We have the first openly gay governor, I think. We have gay women as attorney generals. It's been a pretty good election overall for intersectionality, getting more different kinds of people out there. I don't expect great things out of the Democrats in the coming years. I do expect them to hold Trump's feet to the fire a little bit. Hopefully, Nancy Pelosi won't capitulate too hard. That's what she's indicated she wants to do. And maybe we can get shit done to make the world a slightly better place. Who knows? And that'll do it for another week in Social Justice Alchemy. Hopefully you like what I'm doing here, but like it or not, you can always drop me a line by coming to the Social Justice Alchemy YouTube channel. Or you can track down the blog. That's where I post links and transcripts. That's surgoshan.blogspot.com, surgoshan.blogspot.com. And if you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted, you can find me at another podcast I participate in. That's the Dungeons and Debacles podcast, a D&D podcast hosted by my friend Kevin, where we are a group of morally limited individuals who are trying to free an ancient evil to reshape the world. It's a heck of a lot of fun. You can find that at dungeonsanddebacles.podcast.com, or you can get it from your typical podcatchers. So that's been another week in Social Justice Alchemy. I've been your host, Ron Brockman. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you around.